Today's daf is daf Kuf Vav, and we'll begin here on daf Kuf Hey Amud Beis, and we're talking about various tnoim or conditions in a mincha, in korban mincha, in a case where we're not sure exactly what his nedava, what his neder was, and the Gemara now is going according to Reb Shimon at the bottom of Kuf Hey Amud Beis. And Rab Shimon is of the opinion that in a case of a minchas mafeh, he has the opportunity, a threefold opportunity. He could either bring 10 chalos or 10 rikikim, or there's a third alternative. He could bring 5 chalos and 5 rikikim. So now the Gemara wants to know, how exactly do you work this out? And the last thing that we discussed yesterday was Rav Papa's question that he addressed to Abaye, and that is, we need to figure out how to work out the isaron of soles and the log shemen. And the problem is going to be that, if he brings, let's say, for example, in one kli, he's going to bring, let's say, chalos. In another kli, he'll bring rikikim. In a third kli, he's going to bring a combination of the two. So then you'd require an isaron for each one of the three. So the Gemara says that Reb Shimon happens to be of the opinion that that's not what's required. And that's what Abai responded to Reb Papa, that we know already from a different statement of Reb Shimon that you could bring one of 2 isarons and 1 log of 2 lugim. So it would seem, therefore, that according to Reb Shimon, you could possibly, fulfill all your obligations. So the Gemara now asks, but what about kmitza? You'll need a kmitza from the chalos, you'll need a kmitza from the rikikim, and then you'll need another kmitza for Reb Shimon's both rikikim and the chalos. So the Gemara says, umikmatz hechi komitz, which you'll see here on the bottom of Kufei Amud Beis, just a few lines up from the bottom, about 6-7 lines up. The Gemara says, Masni v'yomer, let him make the following condition. If my commitment was to bring 10 chalos, or alternatively 10 rikikim, each one separately, Amri, then I want to make the following declaration. The kokmitzna mechalos, that kometz that he takes from the chalos, lehevia chalos, that'll be a kometz to be mati the shirayim of the chalos. And the kokmitzna merikikin, that kometz that he takes off the rikikim, lehevia rikikin, that'll be matir the shirayim of the minchas harikikim. But if mechza rikikim mechza chalos, if it's 5 and 5, a split, integrating both rikikim and chalos, Amri, let me make the following stipulation. To kokamitzna mechalos, lehevia mechza chalos umechza rikikim. In other words, since Reb Shimon holds that you can integrate both rikikim and chalos into one korban, it's considered like one mincha, and therefore the kmitza on the chalos can also effectuate a heter shirayim on the rikikim, ukal kmitza merikikin, and if he does a kmitza on the rikikim, lehevi, let that function as a mechza rikikim mechza chalos. And now the Gemara wants to know, is that really valid? V'ha boy mikmatz chad kometz michalos umerikikim, and here we turn to today's daf Kuf Vav. The kometz michalos arikikin umerakikin achalos. No, doesn't he need a kmitza for the chalos and a separate kmitza for the rakikim? And the Gemara answers no. Shamina leil Rabbi Shimon, the Amar of Shimon elsewhere expresses his opinion that that it doesn't matter whether the kmitza turned out to be from the chalos or from the rakikin. That's enough of a fulfillment. But now the Gemara says we have another problem. Va'ika mosar shemen. So it works like this, that with regard to chalos, the shemen is mixed together with the solis. That's called blila. With regard to the rakikim, the shemen is smeared on the top of the hard rakikim, and therefore there's going to be an afkamina with regard to mosar. Mosar means the leftover oil from the log shemen. Va'ika mosar shemen. De'i mechza chalos u'mechza rakikin omar. The halacha is that if you have, according to Reb Shimon, which you do have a combination of half chalos and half rakikin, then the law is that the Mosar Shemen goes back to the chalos, meaning you add that Shemen into the mixture of the chalos. If, on the other hand, ikula rakikin omar, if his commitment was to bring 10 rakikim, then it's a whole different law with regard to the Mosar Shemen, and that is nechal l'kohanim. So again, if there's mosar in the case of chalos, then it goes back to the chalos. If there's mosar in the case of rakikim, then it's nechal l'kohanim. So what are we going to do in this case with the shemen? What are you going to do with the mosar shemen? Because now you have both chalos and rakikim, and you have two choices. Either you put it back into the chalos or you give it to the kohanim. So the Gemara says that there's another opinion in the name of Rabbi Shimon, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. And he says the Sanya, he's recorded in a brisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Shimon, that Moshchan Kimin ki is a letter in the Greek language that looks like a tes in Hebrew, and that's the kind of Mashiach that he does in a case of a minchas mafa that's half chalos and half rakikin. What he does is moshchan, he takes the log shemen, and he smears a shape of a tes or a chi on top of the rakikin. And the halacha is that even though half of that minchas mafa is made up of chalos, nevertheless mosar shemen echel l'kohanim. In other words, normally we would have said that the mosar shemen in the case of chalos goes back into the belila of the chalos, and it's only if you have pure rakikin then it goes to the mosar goes to the kohanim. But here, according to this quote of Reb Shimon, even though he's got both chalos and rakikim, nevertheless the mosar shemen, as if it were purely rakikin, will be nechal l'kohanim. Okay. So that concludes the sugya that we started yesterday. Let me just make sure that's what I just said is correct. Yeah. So now we start a new sugya, but it's a minor sugya, a few lines with Rava, and then we go on to the major sugya for today. Now, the Mishnah established that if a person took a kind of a general nidava, a pledge, and he didn't specify which mincha, there are 5 menachos, 5 categories of menachos, and he's going to have to bring all 5 lotzeis yedei safek. Amalei Rav Kahana Rav Ashi, wait a minute, there's a 6th possibility. Ha'ikos fuke b'minchas nesachim. Now we're going to see in a minute that Rava is committed to the position that you could bring minchas nesachim as a nedava, as a voluntary korban. Now keep in mind that the minchas nesachim is radically different than all five categories of menachos, as we'll see in the sugya that we're about to learn. But one thing that we want to point out here, right off the top, is that a minchas nesachim is brought as an accompaniment, what we call a livui, for either an ola or a shlomim. And it doesn't matter whether the ola was an olas chova or an olas nedava, whether the shlomim was nedava. We bring a minchas nesachim. So again, a minchas nesachim could be brought on a korban tzibur. Lav dafka, it's not limited to a korban yachid. Now, as far as how many esronim you need for a minchas nesachim, the answer is it fluctuates. If the korban was a par, then we need 3 esronim of soles and 6 lugim of shemen. Now, if it was an ayal, a ram, then we need 2 esronim instead of 3 of flour. And instead of 6 lugim for a par, we bring 4 lugim for a ram. Now, if you have a keves, then all you need is 1 isaron and 3 lugim of shemen. And the minchas nesachim needs not only soles and shemen, but also yayin. It needs a nesach yayin. Now, how much wine do you need? The volume of wine exactly equals to the volume of shemen. So whether it be 6 lugim of shemen in the case of a par, 4 lugim of shemen in the case of an ayil, and 3 lugim of shemen in the case of a keves, that would be the same volume of yayin for the nesach. Now, Rava is going to be mechadesh a big chidush. In the Torah itself, minchas nesachim is only accompanying an ola or a shlomim. It's never brought by itself. Comes along Rava, the Omar Rava, misnadev other minchas nesachim b'chol yom. On any day of the year, a person could take upon himself a nedava to bring a minchas nesachim, even though it's not accompanying any other korban. And therefore, the Gemara says, Kiko misapgale, if a person took upon himself a neder to bring a mincha and he doesn't remember which category of a mincha he wants, then why do you tell me there are only 5 categories of menachos? There should be 6 categories of menachos. There should be a final additional possibility that maybe he took upon himself, as Rava had formulated it, a nedava for a minchas nesachim. And now the Gemara is going to give us 5 different differences between all the other menachos and minchas nesachim, meaning minchas nesachim is unique in 5 different ways. And therefore we don't believe that when he took on the neder, he had in mind that very unique, special, well categorized or defined korban mincha of nedava. Number 1. Ba biglal yachid. What he had in mind is that kind of mincha that's brought for a yachid. All menachos, with the exception of minchas nesachim, are brought for a yachid. But the exception is minchas nesachim ba biglal tzibur for lo misapkale. He didn't have in mind to bring that kind of a mincha that could be brought by the tzibur. Number 2, kiko mistapkale. What was the possibility that he had in mind when he took an nedava to bring a mincha? Ba biglal atzma. He had in mind a mincha that comes by itself. Every single mincha, with the exception of minchas nesachim, is brought independently as a separate entity. But ba biglal zevach lo masapkali, as opposed to minchas nesachim, which can only be brought as an accompaniment with another carbon, with a mincha, with a carbon shlamim or a carbon ola. Although again, as Rava says, you could bring it by itself, but that's not your, that's not your mincha, with a capital mem. Number three, Kika Misapkale, what kind of mincha does he have in mind, or he might have in mind, is to una levona. Every single mincha, with the exception of the minchas nesachim, requires levona. But she'ena tuna levona lo misapkale. Number four, Kika Misapkale ba bilog. Right, every single carbon for every single mincha of the five categories. For each isar, you bring a log of shemen, but ba b'shlosha lugim lo misapkale. But with regard to the minchas nisachim, it comes with three logim. Let's just see exactly when it comes with three logim. That's in the case of a keves, right? In the case of a keves. And number five, kiko misapkale tu in a kmitza. But minchas nisachim is kulo kol. It's completely burnt on the mizbeach. You don't separate the mincha into two parts, the kmitza and the shirayim. But she'ena tu una kmitza lo kamisapkale. Okay. That's the sugya of Rava with Minchas Nesachim. Okay, now we get to the main sugya for today. And that's the machlokes between Chachamim and Rebbe. In the Mishnah, it says, Pirashti mincha shel esronim. I know that I took upon myself a pledge to bring esronim in the plural, but I don't know how many esronim I took upon myself to bring. So the Chachamim say that in order to be Yotzei the Safek, he's got to bring a mincha of Shishim Esronim, because that's the maximum number of Esronim in a mincha. More than that, it's not Royal Blila, and therefore it's not a mincha. However, Rebbe has a different opinion, according to which you have to bring multiple Menachos, and that is you bring one with one Isaron, then you bring another mincha with two Isronos, and a third mincha with three Isronos, and you keep increasing the mincha by one until you get to 60. Now, there's an interesting mathematical formula, which I'm sure Steve is very, very much aware of, but I probably learned this as a child, but I don't remember it. Anyway, if you calculate the smallest and the largest number in a series, right? The series here is a series of 60, and you multiply that sum by 1/2 of the amount of numbers in the series, which again, in this case, half the number in the series of 60 is 30. So then you take the 61, which is the largest number, then half of the amount of the numbers in the series, which is 30, and 61 times 30 is 1830, right? 1,830. And that's the amount of menachos that, according to Rebbe, you have to bring. Tanarabana. Now, the basic sugya that we're going to learn today is going to be what's the machlokes all about here between Chachamim and Rebbe. And the Gemara is going to keep presenting another possibility. I think all told, don't hold me responsible for this. I think there are 5 different possible explanations. Tanarabana. We learned in the Brisa. Peirashti mincha. This is just an extension or a more detailed presentation of the Mishnah itself. Pirashti mincha v'kavati b'kli echad shel esronim. So again, he used the word esronim in the plural. The truth is that the Hagos Habach has a slightly different wording of this brisa. Pirashti mincha shel esronim v'kavati b'kli echad. So in other words, he's got to bring a kli into which he fulfills his neder, because he himself added and this he remembers from the time he took his pledge, that it's got to be b'kli echad. So according to the Chachamim, he's going to have to bring. He said Esronim. We don't know how many Esronim. He's going to have to bring 60 Esronim, which means that if, let's say, he really, in truth, is what we call Klapesh Galia up in heaven, and we know that he only wanted to bring one Isara, and that was his pledge, then the other 59 Esronim become an extra Nedava. So therefore, the Brisa says, Kavati, Pirashti Mincha, V'kavati Kli Echad Shal Esron V'eni Yedem Pirashti, Yovi, right, this is the Chachamim, Mincha Shel Shishim Esronim Divrei Rebbe. Now watch what happens over here. According to Rebbe, I'm sorry, did I say Rebbe? I meant to say Chachamim, a slip of the tongue, sorry. According to Chachamim, that he's bringing 60 Esronim in one Kli, and the possibility exists that he only took upon himself a pledge of one Isaron, let's say, I'm giving the most extreme case, then the balance that's in the Kli is a totally different fulfillment. It's not what you call just get see if I can get this right. Right, it's not a dove, it's a neder. Or let's put it the other way. It's not a neder, but it's a dove. And now you're mixing them both in one kli. Not only that, you're probably bringing chulin into the azara. Okay, so I'm just jumping ahead of myself. Let me go slowly. Rebbe Omer Yovi Menachos Shel Esronim Me'echad Ve'ad Shishim. Shehain, and now we get to that number 1830, sorry. Shein Elef Ushmona Meos Ushlosh. A massive amount of Esronim. Another case, very similar. Pirashti V'ani Me'eze Mehen Pirashti. Now, I don't know which Karban, Mincha, of the 5 categories of Menachos I had in mind when I took the Neder. And therefore, Yovi Chamesh Menachos Shel Shishim Esronim. Right now he has a double suffix. He has to wiggle it out from the Esronim in the plural, and how many Esronim, it could be up to 60. And on the other hand, which category of mincha did he accept upon himself? If there are 5, he's got to bring 5. So you both basically multiply 5 by 60, and the total amount of esronim, shehein shlosh meos, he's going to have to bring 300 esronim. I mean, that's the mathematics that I'm capable of doing. And you multiply 5 times 60 is 300. Divrei Chacham. Rebbe Omer, now the massive number, Yavi Chamesh Menachos Shel Shishim Esronim Me'echad Ve'ad Shishim. So now I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to multiply 1830 by 5. Let's see if I'm right. Shem Tisha Alofim Umea V'Chamishim. Let's see if he does it for you. Yeah, 1830 by 5 is 9,150 esronim. That's going to cost them a pretty penny. The moral of the story is be careful when you take a neder. Anyway, so this Rabbosai is the main sugya for today. What lies at the heart of the machlokas? Why is that Rebbe rejects the Chachamim, and it's not enough to bring 60 esronim in one kli as one mincha, but rather he's got to do multiple menachos, each one separate, and he adds another isar every time he has another mincha. Amar Rav Chisda. The question here revolves around whether you're allowed to bring chulin into the azara, because Rebbe Sover also lahachnis chulin azara bonan tzavi mutalachnis. According to Rebbe, you're not allowed to bring chulin into the azara. Now that's very fascinating, because for the sake of the avoda, you surely bring in chulin. Let's say, for example, if I'm wearing clothing, right? My clothing are chulin. They don't have a din of hegdesh. I wasn't magdish my clothing, and yet I come into the azor to do the avoda. Okay, in the case of Kohanim, no, that's not a problem because they're wearing Big Day Kahuna, which are Hegdish. But if I'm coming in to bring my carbon into the Azara, right, I can't go to all parts of the Azara, but I go to the Ezra's Yisrael, and I'm wearing Begod. So that's for the sake of the Avodah. But now, what happens is, and this is where Rebbe has a problem with bringing 60 Esronim in one Kli, that it could be as many as 59 of those Esronim are Chulin because he only took upon himself to bring one Isaron. We don't know. And therefore, Rebbe doesn't want to bring it in. He doesn't want you to allow you to bring it in. So what you're going to do is you're going to bring in multiple menachos, and each one you'll be magdish it, not knowing again which one is your obligation. You'll bring in one isaron with one kli, and then a second kli with two isaronos, and so forth and so on. In each case, you're only bringing in hegdesh into the azara. Whereas the chachamim say there's no problem bringing chulin into the azara, and we're going to allow you to do that. You know, there's a halacha of what's it called? Just give me a second. Sorry, if he brings a right, you're not allowed to shecht chulin ba'azara. That's unquestionable. But Rebbe goes a step further, says you're not allowed to even bring chulin into the azara. Now, there's a big machlokus here whether Rebbe is doraisa or derabana. But I think the general opinion is that Rebbe holds it's awesome in a Torah. Can't bring chulin into the azar. So the only way of solving that is if you bring these multiple menachos, you know, as you add the yisronos in order to get up to the number 60. So that's Roman numeral number 1. That's Rav Papa. I'm sorry, Rav Chizda. Now we get to Rabbah, Roman numeral number 2. Rabbah Omar, Kuliyama Asul Hachnes Chulin Lazara. Wow. Even the Rabbanan agree that you're not allowed to bring chulin to the Azara. But Vahacha, b'mutar la'arev chova b'nedava kamifli Rabbanan sabri mutar la'arev chova b'nedava Rabbanan v'revi savar asul arev chulin b'nedava chova b'nedava. Now, again, I can only explain this to you to the best of my understanding. I looked around, I didn't see so far any extra mileage on this, but on a simple level, Rebbe doesn't want you to bring in one kli both chova and nedava, meaning you took a neder, and therefore, let's take one isaron minimum, right? One isaron minimum is your neder. That's a chova. Now, it's very possible that that's all you took in your neder was one isar. So your chova is limited to one isar. Now you're bringing, according to the Rabbanan, another 59 esronos. Rebbe says that those 59 esronos, on the side that he only accepted upon himself one isar, are all nedava. And he made that stipulation, but he can't bring that both in the same kli. And the Rabbanan have no problem. Who cares? In one kli, you could bring both chova and nedava. Now Abaye is not happy with this presentation of Rava, so he turns to Rav and he says, "L'Rabbana di'amri mutal li'ariv chova b'nedava habe'inon shnei kmotzim." Now, according to the Rabbanon, if let's say one isaron in this kli is chova, the other 59 on nedava, or it could be the other way around. It doesn't matter. It could be 59 on chova and one is nedava. It doesn't matter. But how could you kill two birds with one stone? How can you do one kmitza that'll cover you for both the chova and the nedava? I mean, that's impossible. And Rava responds by saying the kamitz v'hadar kamitz. He's going to have to do one kmitza and then another kmitza. One kmitza for the chova and another kmitza for the nedav. Abaye's not happy. Everything is mixed together in one kli. So it's going to turn out that when he does the kmitza, what's inside the kmitza? Both chova and nedava. I mean, that's not definite, but it's, 99.9% probable. So now the question is, can you do a kmitza on a chova for a nedava? And obviously you cannot. And now that you have everything mixed in, all 60 sronos in one kli, then what you're going to be doing in effect is you're going to be doing a kmitza from a chova on a dava and a dava on a chova. And now Rava introduces another concept here, and Rashi tells us this sugya daf Chaf Daled, that everything depends upon the Kohen, meaning the Bailim who bring the Menachos, they sort of like rely on the Kohanim, the Toli Lebedas Kohanim, the Omer, they basically declare, you know what, Kol Hecha de Mati Yodi the Kohen Hashtachova, when the Kohen digs into this mixture of soles of 60 sronos and he picks up, let that first kometz be chova. Ulbesof, and when he gets to the second kmitza and the Kohen puts his hand in, let that be for nedava. So the Gemara says, okay, maybe you solve the problem of kmitza by introducing the Toli Lebedas Kohen svara. But Akturi Hecha Maktir, and the Gemara is going to go through all the possibilities of what you're going to be maktir first and what you're going to be maktir second. And mimonavshach, no matter how you work it out, you've got a serious problem over here. Akture hechi maktir. Let's go through the first possibility. Liktar nidava beresha. If you, let's say, start the order by doing a haktorah, we're talking about haktorah on the shirai after you did the kami. No, I'm sorry. We're Shiraim is Nechel Lakonim. I meant to say on the Kmitza itself. So the Komets, which Komets are you going to start with? Let's start with Komets Nedava, and let's put it into the Eish as Haktor al Gabi Mizbeach. Then we have a problem. Why? Dechova Hechi Maktele. There's a possibility that he took upon himself a pledge of 60 esronos, right, the max. And therefore, what's going to happen is that if he's maktir the nedava first, then the rest is shirayim, and that shirayim has a status of shirayim before he did the kmitza, meaning the second kmitza. B'chasru le shirayim. For Omar Mar, we have a principle: shirayim shechasru ben kmitza l'aktorah ein maktir kometz alein. There's no possibility of doing this because the halacha requires that if any of the shirayim are missing between the kometz and the haktorah, so what we need is kmitza. And then we need that the shirayim would be mutter, but only as a result of the fact that he was maktir the komets, the komets. But if it was chaser between the kmitza and the haktorah, then there's no haktorah's komets. So you don't have haktorah's komets. If you have mincha without haktorah's komets, it's possible. So let's try another possibility. Liktar chova beresha. Let's start the other way around. Let's start and be maktir the chova, and then you have the shirayim. But wait a minute. The nedava hechi maktir. There's no possibility now of haktorah of the komets of the nedava. Why not? Because, as the Gemara says here on the top of Kufav of Beis, Dilma Kula Chovehi, right? Again, we have the possibility that maybe all 60 Esronos are Chova. And Kol Shu Mimenu Ishim Harehu Bebal Taktiru. So what are you going to do now? Right? You're going to take the initial comments from the Chova, right? And anything left in the kli beyond that kometz is called shirayim. And now he's going to take a second kometz and he's going to have to burn the second kometz for the sake of the minchas nedava. And that's called mimenu la'ishim. And Mimenu Leishim is the Baal Taktiru. That's a lav in the Torah. Right? He's going to be burning what on the he's going to be burning the shirayim of the nedava. Right? Let's read the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Ki chol si'or v'chol dvash lo saktiru mimenu ish el Hashem." And what does the word mimenu mean? Because it's an extra word. And the answer is we have a lav in the Torah that you should not burn. The verse reads the following: Ki kol si'or v'chol dvash lo saktiru. That's number one. And then we read it as lo saktiru mimenu ish el Hashem. Meaning, once the mizbeach, right, of any korban was burnt on the mizbeach, any part of the korban, the remainder of that korban, which is not to be burnt on the mizbeach, you're not allowed to burn it on the mizbeach. In our case, once he fulfilled his chova with the first kometz, he can no longer burn the kometz of the second mincha, the second kometz, which is a kometz of an adava, because that's considered mimenu leishim. Okay, now, before we go on, I want to mention a kasha here of Rashi. Rashi says the following: I don't understand Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said that according to Rebbe, you cannot bring chulin lazara. Correct? Right, let's go back for a second. Right. Revi Savar also lahachnas chulin bazar. So Rashi asks the following question based on a sugi in Zvachim, I think it's on Ayin Vav, that there's a way of resolving that problem. There's a simple way of circumventing the issue of chulin bazara. Even if you hold you're not allowed to bring chulin bazara like Rebbe, but what you could do is you could be makdish lebedek habayis, meaning kedushas damim. And if it's kedushas damim and it was sanctified, then you're allowed to bring it into the azara, even according to Rebbe. Then what he does is inside the azara he does a pigeon on the hegdesh damim, and then it turns out to be chulin. But that's okay, because when he brought it into the azara, it was hegdesh. And Rashi quotes a sugya in Zvachim that says that's exactly what you would do. Okay, I just wanted to mention that kasha of Rashi.